G'day mates, it's Busta here. And before the episode begins, I would like to give Best Fiends a shout out for sponsoring this video. So, as you guys know, true crime and horror is my passion, but even I need the occasional change to keep myself sane. So, when I feel like I need a bit of a mental palate cleanser, my go-to refresher is Best Fiends. Best Fiends is a great little game that features an array of puzzles with an engaging story and is just a really fantastic piece of entertainment for casual gameplay. I've been playing it on my phone at night when I can't sleep, and I'm up to about, I think, level 120 now, and I've really enjoyed the fact that I don't have to invest huge amounts of time into the game to see progress and to have some fun. And that's the really great thing about Best Fiends too. It's just a great little casual game that you can pick up, play as much or as little as you like, put it down, and come back to it at your convenience. I also love the aesthetic of the game and that you can engage your brain with fun puzzles and collect tons of cute characters too. It's a 5-star rated mobile puzzle game on the Apple App Store and Google Play, and you can download free on the Apple App Store or Google Play today. And remember, that's friends without the Best Fiends. This happened within the last 24 hours. So I live in a large city in the US, and like many people, I've taken it on myself to try and get back in shape during the new year, so I've recently got into running and lifting 5 days a week. Yesterday was a run day for me, and I usually start at my apartment and cross over to this long park that runs the river close to my apartment. The park is filled with sports fields, tennis courts, and many runners along the pathway too. I've been going 2 or 3 times a week for just over a month now. So, I was on my run last night listening to a podcast, minding my own business, and decided to go a little further than I normally do. To this kind of longer stretch where the park sort of ends for like a half mile before it picks back up again. Kind of an area where they park equipment. Many people avoid this area due to it kind of being not waterfront and kind of ugly, but I decided to run to the end of this area before circling back home. As I'm running, I see a man, 200 or feet so ahead of me, kind of walking in my direction. Not unusual at all. I've passed like 40 people already. But this area is empty except him and I, as most people circle back. Still though, I ride my bike here to commute for work and have never gotten weird vibes. I'm also an average built man and feel pretty secure most places in my relatively safe neighborhood. So, I keep running, listening to my podcast, when I notice the man's path is directly in line with me, as in, if I continue 150 more feet, I would dead set run into him. So I shift to the other side of the path, 10 or so feet, keep running, not paying attention. Looking back up now, and he's in my path again. Still no alarms because, well, maybe he shifted to get out of my way too, and we did that thing where you kind of walk into each other almost. So I shift back to the side that I started on, and this time I watch him, and he shifts to my side. I'm thinking this guy must be messing with me. I'm 50 feet away now, and between there and 20 feet, I keep shifting more and more quickly, and he follows me exactly to the point that he's sidestepping instead of moving forward, waiting for me to reach him. At this point, I take his presence in. He's 6'3" at the shortest, in jeans and black hoodie with a hood up. Can't really make out his face due to a streetlight behind him casting a shadow, but I begin to realize, oh shit. I come to a stop and go to pull my headphones out and begin the sentence, "What the hell's up, man?" I get to the "what the hell" part when he raises both arms above his head and begins to scream at me. No legible words that I can hear over my podcast at least, and I do notice that he has something long and white or beige in his hands. And at this point, I begin to backtrack, keeping eyes on him. All of a sudden, he dashes towards me, running with his arms stretched out to grab me. I turn and hightail it the other way. It should be known too that I'm not in the best shape at this point. I've had numerous injuries requiring surgeries, and I've just done about 75% of my intended run for the night. But I can tell you that I've never run faster. He kept pace though and closed much of the distance, but When we started going slight uphill, I continued to make ground. We came to a fork in the path after about a minute of this. The two paths circled around a fenced-in area that contained a construction vehicle or mowers, etc., and I made it look like I was going one way and, at the very last moment, dashed the other way. The paths kind of made a circle, so I was able to get far enough ahead to where he couldn't see me via the fence and bushes, and when I felt like it was my chance, I dove into a bush, clawed my way under the fence, and crawled through the space and out the other side of the fence. He kept looking for me in the bushes, prowling back and forth, and finally saw me on the other side of the enclosure, and at this point, I was already on the phone with the police trying to get help as gulped down breaths of air were continuing. I was also warning other runners, and he eventually just followed my pace opposite side of the fence. He kept ducking into darker areas around the enclosure, and eventually I just lost sight of him. I began getting worried again and kept wandering around, warning people while I was waiting on the cops. After about 15 minutes of not seeing him, I just pieced the hell out of there as the cops said that they were close. The jog home was horrible, and any time a runner passed me, I would have a mini panic attack. I was kind of in shock, I think, and running off adrenaline the remainder of the night. I'm not really sure what happened or what was going on. It felt like it was something from a movie. Today I checked the Citizen app and Twitter to see if anything had happened, and I'm not sure if it's related. It most likely isn't, but 5 hours after I called the cops, they pulled the body of a man out of the river a mile or two downriver from where the attempted attack initially occurred. About 3 years ago, I went camping with my girlfriend, now ex, as she had always expressed interest but never had been. The spot that we went to is in the Huron National Forest and is my go-to trail or camp spot as it's hidden deep in the forest and the access to the trails is close and easy for ATVs. My family has not been going to this spot for about 6 years now, and my friends had introduced me about 10 or so years. But we went for a weekend trip, and I'm glad that we didn't go any longer. When we got there, everything was going well, except we did notice a group of people that were hanging out next to our campsite, but they were just kind of stargazing and ended up leaving at some point. Then around midnight is when the weird stuff started to occur. At first it sounded like someone was laughing at us, but the laugh never ended and got very high-pitched and sounded as it just kind of kept going. After a while, we both kind of got a little bit scared and went into the tent to try and sleep, and that was when the laugh of the noise moved up higher, and then started to circle the campsite. After a while of that happening, it just all of a sudden stopped, and then started again at around 3 a.m. When it started again, the fire was going out, so I went and stoked the fire with my shotgun in hand and turned on the flashlight to see if maybe I could see any coyotes or something around the campsite, but when I did, I didn't see anything or hear any movements below. This all went on until 6 a.m. and then stopped, and that was finally when we were able to get some rest. After we woke up, we checked around the campsite and didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so we just kind of packed up. Once we were packed up and good to go, I go to start my vehicle and it's just completely dead. That really freaked me out, as I'm always paranoid about leaving things plugged in that kill the battery, and I made sure everything was closed properly and unplugged, yet somehow the battery just still died. I was able to get a jump from a AAA, and the phone call was hard to explain, and the lady who took the call didn't believe me, but at the end we both just laughed at it. But after that happened, I told my friend who had shown me the campsite and also has a cabin in the same forest, roughly 25 miles away from that campsite, about what happened, and he got freaked out. He told me about 2 incidences which he has had, one at the campsite and one at this cabin. At the campsite, he stated that one night after we had all returned from trail riding and went to bed, he stayed up to hang out by the fire and have a few drinks. While he was hanging out, he was just looking off into the distance, and when he did, he saw a pair of eyes up in the trees looking directly at him. He described them as kind of bioluminescent eyes, and he flashed his high-powered flashlight at them, but when he did, there was nothing there. and as soon as the flashlight turned off, they were there again, looking right back at him. So he just packed up and went right to bed that night. He didn't tell us because he didn't want to scare us, plus he wasn't sure if we would believe him. At the cabin, though, he was hanging out with his brother, and they were both just chilling by the fire outside when they both saw a pair of eyes looking at them from a trail that leads into the woods. They stated that at the height the eyes were looking at them, whatever it was, had to have been at least 7 feet tall, if not taller. They started shooting at it with their rifles, 2 30-30s, and the eyes disappeared, but once they were done, they reappeared and were closer this time. At that point, they both freaked out and went back into the cabin, and they didn't leave until daylight. We have no idea what this could have been, but all of us have felt very scared when these events were happening. After we all talked about it, one of the brothers thinks that it's a Wendigo. I really don't know what to believe about that, and I don't know what it could be, but I haven't felt that scared since that night. This is something that I didn't realize the severity of until I was much older. So, my mum had left me and my brother home alone one day. It was midday. My brother was 12, maybe 13 or so, I think. So, I must have been around 9 years old. I was watching him play Xbox in our living room. He had his headset on, talking to his friends, when there was a knock from the door in our carport. I run and answer the door without looking, and it's a grown man that I've never seen before. We're separated by the screen door, which at the time was actually unlocked. He asks, "Hey kid, are your parents home?" And horror just immediately washes over me. First of all, he's knocking from the carport, which is strange in and of itself. A stranger would knock on our front door, right? Plus, our carport is empty. We only had one car, and my mother had taken it. And I have a feeling that this man knows that my parents aren't home. I'm afraid. I really don't know why, but I was immediately scared. My brother in the other room comes to mind, and while I've never had a father figure, my brother has always been the one who has made me feel safe. He was the strongest person in the world to me, someone who could protect me in any situation. How most people would regard their father, I think. Anyway, I feel as though I can barely speak, and I'm wide-eyed, and I manage to stutter out eventually. No, but my big brother's here." Without even a moment's pause, this man reaches for the screen door and starts to open it. And, like an act of God or divine intervention of some sort, an arm reaches out from behind me over my shoulder and grabs the door. My brother pushes past me, holding the door, forcing the man back with his presence. The man tells my brother that he was looking to buy some crappy old swing set that was in our front yard at the time, and eventually my brother closes the door and just goes back to his headset and continues playing. I sit down as well, and I just continue watching him, and I don't believe we ever told our mum for some reason. Luckily, I never encountered this person again, and it pretty much fades from my memory. But as I got older, it did become one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. Creepy, and not so much because of what happened, but what could have. It was just really unnerving how absolutely oblivious we were to the whole situation. I like to think that the man was planning to lock me in a room, rob the place and leave, but boy, people can be really evil sometimes. So, who knows? Back in the 80s, my parents bought a camping trailer, and every summer, my family, mum, dad, and 2 brothers, we would all go camping. Often a few of my cousins and aunt would also tag along. Sometimes it would be a weekend trip, and other times we would stay for a week at a time. Most camping trips were up in NH. It was so much fun, and for most of my childhood, nothing really crazy happened at all. But one morning, I woke up and noticed that my cousin or best friend was sleeping in the same bunk as me. I didn't think much about it, but as I pushed her to let her know that I was getting up, she said, "Are you really awake this time?" I said, "Yeah, to her strange question and went to the front of the camper to get a drink. My mum and aunt were sitting outside the camper having coffee, and when I went out to say good morning, they said, "Come talk to us." I walked outside and could tell that my mum looked upset, like she'd been crying. My aunt was a bit shaky as she asked, "Do you remember what happened last night?" I shook my head no and listened as my aunt told me about the extremely strange night, which I do not recall whatsoever. My aunt explained that at about 2 a.m. she woke up to the door to the camper being wide open. She quickly checked the bunks and noticed that I was nowhere to be found. She woke up my mum and dad, and then my mum and dad got flashlights and started frantically searching for me outside around the immediate area. My aunt stayed behind because there were still 4 kids sleeping in the camper, and after a scary 10-minute search, my dad finally spotted me. I walked out of the camper and into the trees about 30 feet away. It was far enough that I could not be seen unless he walked into the trees a bit, and I was just standing out there in the dark, with my eyes completely open but not responding to him at all. I had no shoes, no flashlight, and was wearing just shorts and a t-shirt. He said that he grabbed my hand and started walking me back to the camp, and he remembers asking me, "Hey, what's going on? Why in the world would you come out here on your own like that?" Then I finally spoke up and said, "I need to wait here, Dad. Let's just stay here." My mum remembers that I then started crying as she and my dad let me go back to the camper. Whenever I think back to this story, I get a strange feeling too. But thank God that my aunt woke up when she did. It's important to note too that I've never been known to sleepwalk before or after that night since then. It truly was an isolated incident which could have had a very different ending had I not been so lucky. My mum was so upset too that she decided to get rid of that trailer, and we didn't do much camping after that night. This happened at a large shopping centre in Adelaide, South Australia, a couple of months ago. But for some context too, it was around 7 p.m. on a late trading night, already completely dark outside. So, I was shopping with my partner, and she went into a clothing store, both to make some returns and also try on some replacement clothes. I knew that it was going to take a little bit of time, and I'm not overly interested in women's clothing, so I stood outside in the very busy centre and was responding to some work emails on my phone, paying very little attention to all of the people walking past. After about 5 minutes, I was approached by a fairly young-looking gentleman, early to mid-20s at most. I'm 23 myself, with a very strong European accent, possibly French, who said to me something along the lines of, "You were with a girl, yes? She was looking for you. She came up to me, I think, because we are wearing similar shirts and thought you were me." Thinking back at it, other than buttons on our shirts, they were not really similar at all. But he told me that he was trying to find me and made it seem like something was wrong, and insisted that he could show me where she went. I looked into the store and couldn't see my partner. It was a fairly small clothing store inside the centre. You could see all of it from outside, in fact. I found out later, too, that she was just in a changing room. But I was extremely confused at the time. My partner knows that I would just be aimlessly pacing in circles outside as I do when I'm reading emails, and would never walk off looking for me, not to mention that she could have just texted or called. Although confused, he was moving away fast enough that I didn't have time to ask many questions, and not being able to see my partner convinced me to at least follow where he was going. There had to have been hundreds of people around, so I wasn't very worried for my own well-being. And as I followed the gentleman, I was leaving a good 2 or so meters between us, walking behind. I don't remember feeling overly unsafe or concerned about being near him, just extremely confused and kind of unsure, I suppose. He could see that and kept repeating something along the lines of, "This isn't a joke. Please believe me. I want to help. Come with me. She went this way. I saw where she went." We'd only been walking for about 10 seconds at this point, but covering a fair bit of distance from the store that I was originally at. I said something like, "Where was she going? What did she say to you?" And he told me, "Sorry, my English isn't very good. She's this way." We kept walking like this for another 10 seconds before we reached the doors to the building. We were on a side of the centre that has doors leading to both a car park and a large loading dock for one of the supermarkets. Although busy in the centre, there was almost no one around the doors going in or out. And he walked straight outside and said something along the lines of, "She was sitting just on this bench. I don't know where she went." Other than a small bit of light under the cover where a bench is, it was completely dark as soon as you walked any further away. I walked up to the point where the automatic doors opened, but no further, and looked, 1 foot outside, 1 foot inside. And he said something like, "She must have walked this way. Come, I'll help you find her." And started to walk left, which only leads to a dark and secluded loading dock, not visible from the doors. You could tell the urgency that he was trying to convey to follow him now, though, and I was already very confused and unsure up until that point. But as soon as it happened, I knew that whatever he wanted me to follow him down there for wasn't going to be good. It was one of those moments where you piece it all together finally, and realized how many warning signs you somewhat noticed but ignored, and I instantly felt like I was in danger. I remember saying, "All good, thank you, I'll call her," and just turning straight around and walking back inside. I turned around after a few seconds and couldn't see him outside anymore. Although it felt like a long time, all of this must have transpired in about, maybe 45 seconds from when he first started talking to me. And it was at this point that I texted my partner, who let me know that she was still at the same store that I last saw her at. At the time, I said to her that I think I may have almost been abducted. A bit over the top, I know, especially for a fairly large 20-year-old bloke like I am. I'm assuming, though, that if I'd gone down there, I was probably going to get robbed. I'm glad, though, that I'll hopefully never know. I went straight to center security, though, and I did report it. They took some details of where and when it happened, but didn't seem overly concerned. But anyway, be careful out there, guys, because you just never know who may cross your path one day. This story took place in Texas back in the fall of 1994. I was traveling from a small town outside of Dallas called Grapevine and was heading to my duty station. And I would never take this route again after what happened this night along the I-20. So I was traveling alone and had left at around 7 p.m. on my road trip across Texas. If you've ever been to Texas, then you know that you can drive for hours on end and still be in Texas. And this story would change my life forever. So I decided to stop at a rest stop along the highway to stretch my legs and take a piss. I noticed a woman in a late 70s model Ford parked in the lot when I got out. I went and did my business, had a smoke, and before I left I noticed the woman still sitting in her car. So I walked over and knocked on the window, which did startle her, and asked if she was okay or needed help. She smiled and said that her tire was flat, and that her battery had died while she was waiting here. I asked if she had a spare tire, and she said no. I asked if anyone was coming to get her, and she said that her daughter was supposed to, but it's been several hours of just her waiting there. I asked where she was going, and she told me the location, so I offered to give her a ride if she wanted. She actually started crying and said that this would be wonderful. So we started heading to the location, and we're making small talk. I told her that I was in the Air Force and heading to Lubbock. She said that that was wonderful and hoped that I really enjoyed it. I did notice, though, that she kept looking in the mirror, so I asked if she was okay with me giving her a ride. She smiled and said that everything was fine. She was just happy that somebody had stopped. We finally get to her house in a small suburb just outside of town. She thanks me for a ride and hands me a scrap of paper with a home number on it. And she asks that I call her when I get to my destination so she can know that I made it safely. I thanked her and said that I would, but I'd wait until the morning since I knew that it was going to be late when I arrived. I arrived at Reese AFB late that night and stayed at the on-base hotel. I got checked in and took a shower, and eventually I just went to bed. The next morning I got up and I got dressed for the day and went to find my unit HQ. I didn't even think about the night before because I had so much to do, checking squared away and whatnot, and it wouldn't be for another 2 weeks before I came across that scrap of paper with the number. I kind of felt bad that I hadn't kept my promise to call, so I decided to stop what I was doing and just give her a call. I called the number and a young woman answered the phone, so I asked for Sandy. The woman on the line said, "Who?" So I apologized and said maybe it was Sandra. She asked who this was, and I gave her my name and explained that I had given her a ride a couple of weeks back. She said that I must be confused, and I read the number off of the paper in my hand just in case I dialed the wrong number. She said no, I had the correct number, but I couldn't give her mother a ride home because she had passed away in the early 80s. She was apparently driving home and began having car troubles, so she stopped at a rest stop just outside of town. When she didn't make it home, her father became concerned, and it was at that time that there was a knock on their door, and 2 state troopers and local police officers were at the door. She said that a trooper saw the vehicle stopped at the rest stop and stopped to check it out. What he found and what she told me gave me chills. Her mother had been brutally sexually assaulted, and her head was completely bashed in. Someone had slid her tires and disconnected her battery, and the worst part was that she didn't die right away, as there was bloody handprints on the window, steering wheel, and shifter, because she was trying to leave. The trooper said that they didn't have any suspects, but there were times that certain motorcycle clubs would pass through at night. I described the car and what her mother looked like and what she was wearing as best as I could recall. She definitely didn't look old enough to have a daughter my age, but her daughter just started crying and asked that I not call back. A few days later, though, I received word to report to the squadron commander, so I headed over to our building. When I arrived, my captain called me into his office and began asking me questions about where I lived and when did I drive in and what route I took. I immediately knew that something was wrong, and we then went into a briefing room where my CO and Texas Ranger and a state trooper were seated. I introduced myself and I took a seat. They began by asking the same questions my captain had previously asked and why I had called the number and spoke with the woman. I explained everything as clearly and in detail as possible. They then finished taking notes and the Ranger asked who needed a smoke. So my CO excused himself, and the captain, the 2 officers, and myself stepped out back to the smoking area. And this was when the Ranger informed me that he was the actual trooper who had found the car back in the early 80s, and that the only reason he came out today was because of the details that I mentioned in my phone call to the daughter. The trooper said that they do get calls about a stranded woman every so often, but when they get there, they never find anything. So, in closing, I guess you need to be careful who you decide to help because not everyone is what they seem. I'd like to state too that the reason specific time frames are not given is due to the personal nature of some of these events. But I can assure you that everything I've told you is true. I was in the kitchen the night before last, washing up some plates from dinner, when I glanced out the window in front of the sink and I saw someone standing at the far end of my yard. From what I could tell, it looked like a man of average build with a scruffy appearance. He was essentially behind my neighbor's tool shed, which is right on the border of my property, and so I thought that he might be somebody that they knew. It was dark though, and he was quite a distance away, so I couldn't really see what he was doing. His back was mostly turned to me as well, but by his movement, it looked like he was patting the ground with a shovel, as if he'd just buried something and was covering it up with dirt. This definitely raised my suspicions a bit, and so I called my neighbors to ask if they were aware that there was someone behind their shed. They said that they were not, and the husband went outside to investigate. I saw my neighbor open his door, and the man saw or heard it and bolted off into the woods. I went outside to meet my neighbor and see if there was evidence of what the man had been doing, so we both arrive at the same spot, and I tell the neighbor that the man fled, and the neighbor says that he saw him running away. We look down at the ground, and there is indeed fresh dirt where someone was digging. The neighbor gets the shovel, which the man dropped when he ran off, and starts digging it back up, nervously because we were both expecting something gruesome, no doubt. However, what we dug up has left us with more questions than answers. It was a plastic bag with something softball-sized and heavy inside. We dump out the contents, and it's a rock painted red and a small smiley face button on it, the kind you pin on your shirt. And why would somebody be out trespassing on someone's property in order to bury a painted rock and a button? And yes, it's definitely paint on the rock, not blood. It's not a murder weapon as far as we can tell. But still, the neighbors and I reported it to local law enforcement, and they came and they took a statement. They took the rock and the button too, just in case it turns out to be connected with a crime. The whole ordeal has me a bit on edge, to be honest, but why else would someone bury something like that in the dark? The police combed the woods last night too, and they did come across something which makes this whole thing even more unnerving. They found a spot about a mile behind our homes in the woods where it appears that someone may have been living. I live in a pretty small town in a more rural area, and a lot of people here hunt deer and turkeys and the like. The spot that they discovered apparently had been an old lean-to type shelter that had been used at one point for hunting, but probably had been abandoned for a while when whoever found it and decided to live there. In the spot there were some old blankets, a recently used fire pit someone had made, and a few other things like food and wrappers and plastic plates and a small cooking pot. There was also something, though, that freaked my neighbour and I out quite a bit. The guy had a portable kerosene heater unit, and it was the exact portable kerosene heater that went missing from my neighbour's shed almost a year ago. So at this point, we believe this guy has been living there for quite some time. However, no one in the area has reported to have seen anyone like him around, or had any other incidences so far, but police are still in the process of talking to the other neighbours in the area. It does appear that he's left the spot at this point, but there's no being certain that he won't return. In the meantime, I'm staying at my sister's in a neighbouring town, and my neighbours are staying with their adult children. My neighbour and I are going with the police escort back to our homes to set up security cameras and the like later today as well. I really don't want to go anywhere near there tonight, but it might be the only hope that we have of catching this guy and putting everyone's minds at ease. The police are taking this matter pretty seriously as well, because many years ago we had a case of a homeless man in the woods who attempted to abduct a young woman. So between that and being a small town, this sort of thing really rattles us a lot. They're trying to track down the film used for the camera, or where it came from rather, but they suspect that it may be an older camera and film, and if the man was homeless, it's likely that he just found it. As for the cause of death for the kitten that they found, they're running tests as we speak, but the vet's initial thought is that it looks like it was poisoned. This doesn't necessarily mean that it was killed intentionally. It could have just accidentally eaten something that someone set out as bait for rodents and whatnot, and the man could have just found it that way. Who knows? But it definitely hadn't been dead long when the man had it, because rigor mortis had not yet set in at the time. Meanwhile, too, the whole neighbourhood is aware and have been alerted by authorities to be wary and keep their eyes peeled for anything or anyone suspicious. The police do believe that they may actually have a lead as well. A man fitting the general description of our guy is actually pretty familiar to the local gas station convenience store clerk, and as soon as the clerk heard about the incidences, he called the police to tell them about the guy. I also paid the clerk a visit this afternoon on my way back to my sister's house, after installing cameras at my neighbour's and my own residence, and I spoke with him personally. It seems the man would often come into the store to use their can and bottle return, and the clerk believed that that's how the guy was making his living, by picking up bottles and cans out of people's trash and recycling and then returning them for change. The clerk says that the man told him his name was Robert and went by the nickname Robbie. The clerk believes that Robbie does have mental health problems by the way that he acts and some of the things that he says as well. It appears he suffers from paranoid delusions, maybe. The clerk said that usually he only ever spoke in short sentences when spoken to and never made eye contact. However, the clerk overheard the man rambling and mumbling to himself while returning cans one day, repeating something over and over about cleaning the dirty water where all the people keep bleeding. Aside from that rather highly unnerving detail, the clerk said that Robbie seemed pretty much harmless. But here's something that definitely puts a bit of a twist into the story, and may put your minds a little at ease, though not much, about what happened to the kitten. So, the store clerk said that maybe 2 or 3 weeks prior to my initial encounter, the man Robbie had come to the store with some bags of cans and bottles. He also had a kitten with him. It fits the description of the one that we found. The kitten seemed healthy, but a little too skinny, and the man said that he'd found it in the woods and thought that it was a stray. He asked the clerk to look after the kitten for a few minutes while he returned cans, and afterwards he purchased a small bag of dry cat food and a hot dog and cola for himself with the change. The clerk says the man seemed to really care for the kitten and even said, "He's my friend," and when the clerk asked him the cat's name, the man said that he was still thinking of one, but he thought that he might call him Frankie. Then he said something else that was definitely unnerving. Little babies, like Frankie, like kittens. Though it is possible that he meant that kittens are like little babies, and not that babies like kittens. I don't know. It's worded creepily either way. So now the police and myself are thinking this quite probably is a homeless, mentally ill man, and the kitten was in fact his pet. The tests have come back that the kitten had rat poison in his system, so we think someone in the area left rodent poison out in some food to bait raccoons. We have a serious raccoon problem here. They often get into the trash and make huge messes. The kitten probably wandered off in search of food and found the poison bait, ate it, and died, unfortunately. The man probably thought that it was me and or my neighbor who had poisoned the cat, for whatever reason. Maybe the location he discovered it deceased was near us, or maybe he thought that it was on purpose because he had previously buried things in our yard, which we don't have any explanation for the first items yet. But I assure you that we are not the type of people to leave poison out for innocent animals to find. We have pets of our own, in fact. However, we know that a lot of people do bait and poison the raccoons here. Either way, I think it's possible this guy might not have been doing anything truly malicious the first time when he buried the rock in the pin, but the second time, it's possible that he was angry and did mean to threaten us, because he thinks that we killed his only friend and beloved pet. But that's just speculation, and nothing is set in stone at this time. I'll close by saying this, though. Even though this is still a very serious and frightening situation, and he is still considered highly dangerous, mostly to myself and my neighbors, because he may try to do more to take revenge for what he thinks that we did, I'm also incredibly heartbroken for this man if that indeed was his pet kitten. I honestly cannot blame him for his actions if he truly is mentally ill and mostly harmless as well. If that is indeed the case as well, I do hope that they find him and get him somewhere where he can get some help. Police are still questioning local shop owners and other citizens in the area for further information. They're also searching missing persons databases to see if anyone has reported anyone fitting Robbie's description as missing within recent years, to see if they can identify him and figure out possible current whereabouts. And until then, I'll continue to stay with my sister and my neighbors with their family for as long as I can, just to be out of harm's way. The newly installed security cameras have night vision and motion sensors as well, and they're active and recording. And so, I'll keep you guys posted. So I was very young when this happened, maybe 3 or 4 years old, so I'm guessing around 97 or 98. I know your mind can implant false memories, so I don't know if it actually happened or not, but I do remember it pretty vividly. So we were living in Germany, and I shared a room with my brother who's 4 years older than I am. The head of my bed was right below the only window in the room. And one night, he jumped out of his bed and ran across the room to where I was to look out the window. And this is where things seemed weird, because it was like he knew that something was out there and he needed to see it, but there was no way that he could have seen or heard anything down there at all. I got up to see what the fuss was about, and down on the street below was a man stood completely still facing the road which stretched away from where we were. He was tall and broad, and he wore a suit, a long brown overcoat, and a fedora-type hat which made him look like someone from the 50s. But he also had no head. His hat just seemed to float. He turned and walked away from us down the street about 20 yards, stopped and turned to face the road again. 20 seconds later, he walks another 20 yards, and once again he stops and turns to the road. He did this 4 or 5 times over before he disappeared into the darkness as well. He never turned in our direction or in any other, apart from straight down the street and to the road. There were no cars or other people coming down the street when he was on it, and the atmosphere around him just seemed a ghostly still, if that's the right way to say it. But the fact that my brother seemed to know that he was there is what weirds me out the most, as much as the fact that he seemed to have no head. Weirdly too, I don't remember feeling scared or intimidated. I felt more excited to see this headless man. It's one of the earliest memories that I have, and it's stuck with me ever since as well. I've never spoken to my brother about this, nor have I told anyone, but I'm wondering, has anyone else had a similar experience, or could this just all be in my head? I'm skeptical for the most part about the paranormal, so I just really don't know what to make of it. So this story and the background surrounding it is going to sound mildly insane, to put it simply, but I ask that you please try to keep an open mind. Growing up, I've always been more spiritually in tune than what could be perceived as normal. As I've gotten older, that hasn't really changed. I can go into so many stories about this too, such as dreams that I've had come true, or cases of sleep paralysis in which I've seen and felt things, an encounter with what I believe to be a demon, and so on and so forth. But for this, I'm going to start off with my earliest and most prominent memory of living in a haunted house for a year and a half. If anyone's interested, I'll tell my other stories too, but for now, to the haunted house. So, I was 12 at the time. My family had moved into a house built in the 1930s, set up in a neighborhood of matching and equally old houses in a long straight street. It was a fairly dark neighborhood with tall trees, and truth be told, it was almost a cliche horror setting. But being a sheltered Catholic girl, I didn't think anything of it. I was excited to live in this new house and make new friends, and the first day in the house was relatively normal. The movers would arrive the next day with all of our respective furniture, so for that day we had our mattresses, some plates, utensils and food, and I wasn't really bothered by the house at first, or maybe I was just too blinded by my excitement to really notice things. I don't know. But this all changed when night came. I went to my empty room where my mattress was, as well as a few personal items laid out, and started to make my bed. The layout of the room was fairly simple. My bed is in the right-hand corner of the room with the doorway right across from it. My closet was on the wall that my bed was pressed to, so I could see its trim and outline from my bed, but not inside of it, if that makes sense. The closet also had a door, and for whatever reason, the closet bothered me, even the first day. I can't really explain it, but I just didn't bother putting my clothes away, as I was too uncomfortable with it. But weirdly, I also couldn't shut the closet door. I just didn't want to go near it, even if it meant giving myself comfort by not having it open. Like I said, I just can't explain it, and it gave me bad vibes, but being 12, I just kind of shrugged it off as standard anxiety. You know, oh my goodness, a closet's are scary, monsters are under the bed sort of stuff. I figured the fear would just go away eventually. When bedtime neared, though, I realized that I had no lamps in my room, with the only light being from the overhead fan. The thought of being in the room in total darkness definitely left me with a bad and terrible feeling, so I decided that I would sleep with my bed door open and the hallway light on as well. I didn't want my parents to assume that I was being babyish, so I justified it in case I woke up and needed to go to the bathroom, get water, etc. I didn't know the layout of the house, and I didn't want to fumble in the darkness to turn my light switch on. My parents understood, so great. At the time, I had a golden retriever who was the light of my life. She was my childhood dog who always slept in my room, usually on my floor or bed. And when I was ready for bed, I took a treat and I brought her in with me. I tried to bring her to my mattress with me, encouraging her with words and food, but as soon as she entered my room, she just whirled around and left. I tried to bring her in my room with me several times, but always to the same result. My mum said that the dog was probably just anxious due to the move, and in the end I accepted that. So I just tried to sleep alone that night. but I couldn't sleep though. I laid in my bed, bundled in my blankets. Coming from a conservative Catholic family, my brain never once jumped to the idea of ghosts or spooky things. I had no idea what I was feeling, but one thing was just crystal clear. Though I was alone, I truly didn't feel like I was. I glanced periodically towards my closet, noting how it felt as if something was peering around the corner at me. I didn't see anything, but it felt as if something was there and watching me. I could only stare back before trying to fall asleep, and sleeping in that room was just impossible. After we received our furniture, though, I immediately set up my lamp on my desk on the end of the room that I would use as a nightlight. I refused to sleep in my room in darkness. Bear in mind, though, that I had outgrown sleeping with a nightlight by 6, so being 12 years old and insisting my light be on for me to sleep warranted eye rolls from my parents. They thought that I was being ridiculous, especially since I had no explanation as to why. How could I explain what I was feeling? I couldn't, because I didn't even understand it. But in the end, they didn't argue with me, and they just let me do it. By night, I'd turn my lamp on, burrow myself into my blanket, and just try to ignore that terrible feeling of something watching me. I didn't put any clothes in my closet, and I kept it in my dresser, even if it didn't make sense for dresses, jackets, and so on. I put a Harry Potter poster on the door to make it friendlier, as if a protective barrier to provide comfort. And I remember one night, I was laying on my side, just staring at the wall. I was curled up and bundled in my blankets in my safe burrito form, only my face peeking out so that I could breathe. And for whatever reason, something compelled me to look up, so I did. And in a slow, almost leisurely movement, I saw the shadow of what looked to be a person move across the wall. I didn't process it fully at the time. I tried to justify it in the moment as being the fan's shadow, but as an adult, I look back and I honestly shudder recalling the distinct features of a nose, a chin, and even a hunched back. Another night, curled in my bed, I thought that I saw movement at the end of it. A shadow, really ducking downwards, and I don't know what compelled me to do this, honestly. Maybe 12-year-old me was brave or an idiot, but I pulled myself out of my burrito form and moved across my bed to peer down at the end of it, as if I would see someone hunched there, or my dog, or anything. When I did, I saw nothing, of course. But the shadow was just so distinct and so dark, and I knew something had to have been there. I curled back into my blankets and I tried to sleep. One other night, though, this time not in my room, I went to my parents' bedroom to retrieve some cough medicine from their cabinet when I heard something so distinct that it gave me pause. There was a tap from inside the walls, and this took me off guard, so I turned to look to the wall where it was coming from. The tapping persisted, quiet and slow at first, but gradually began to build in sound. This may sound ridiculous, but I'm willing to put my hand on a Bible and swear on my soul, but I swear to you that I saw the walls move, as if something was pressing against it. It slithered up the wall and into the ceiling as if trying to break out, and as if the wall were made of softer substance. I began to sob and I ran downstairs. My dad was away on a business trip and my mum was asleep on the couch. She had taken some medication because we were both sick, so she was passed out cold. I tried to shake her awake, begging her to wake up, telling her that I believed someone was upstairs, but she just wouldn't budge. I ran upstairs back to her room, and the horror persisted. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I ran into my parents' bed, burrowed under the covers, and I could have run, but being in my room was no comfort, and I was afraid of every other room in the house, so I stayed under the covers until the tapping stopped, and then I dragged my dog into the room with me and shut the door. And that night, she just cried and whined the whole night, sometimes pawing at my door, but I was too afraid of being alone, and I cried myself to sleep that night. Something lived in that house, and I don't know what it was or if there was more than one thing. But when I reflect on living in that place, I also reflect on how every night was just a hellish nightmare, and how every sleepover at a friend's house away from it was a breath of fresh air. Moving from that house gave me great relief. but we moved into a new home for a while that was beautiful and bright, and I slept like I'd never slept before that first night, safely and with relief. And my dog even slept in my room with me willingly that night too. But that old house, I'll never, ever forget it, and its other occupants. To preface this, I'm a 30-year-old wife, mother, and Marine Corps veteran. I practice and help instruct Taekwondo and Krav Maga, and honestly, never in a million years did I expect something like this would ever happen to me. But last night, it did. And I hope that this is the right place to get this off my chest. So last night, I went to Walmart's to do some grocery shopping. On my way into the store, I noticed a shady-looking beat-up grey sedan circling around the parking lot and not parking. I found it odd, but brushed it off and went into the store. After I finished shopping, I came out of the store and noticed the same car still circling. It was odd for sure, but not enough to make me put up my guard or anything. I unloaded my groceries in the car, took the cart back to the cart corral, and when I entered my car, I got a really strong urge to immediately lock my doors, even before I started my car. And almost instantly after I did this, that same sedan whipped up, partially blocked me in so that the only way that I could get out was to reverse. And it was a middle-aged man, and his window was rolled down, and he was yelling at me. What made me nervous, though, is that both of his hands were in his pockets. I couldn't be sure if he was just weird and cold, or if maybe he had something in those pockets. So I didn't want to take my eyes off of his hands, which made it hard for me to back up. So I rolled down my window an inch and asked him what he needed. Stupid, I know. But he said that he needed help and that he couldn't hear me well, so could I open my door? I asked him what he needed help with, and he started yelling at me to just open my effing door. At that point, I put my car in reverse and chanced a glance at my backup camera, during which time he had gotten out of his car and was now at my door, trying to yank at the handle, still yelling at me to open my door. I tore out of there so fast that I'm surprised I wasn't actually stopped by the cops. I found a crowded, well-lit parking lot and instantly called the police, who thankfully took me seriously and went to take a look. But by that time, the man was long gone. I know nothing happened, and perhaps I shouldn't still be shaken up over it, but that encounter just really shook me, and I just wanted to share this, so thanks for listening.